What makes a game feel like Resident Evil? Is it the grotesque, mutated beasts that roam the corridors? Is it the maniacal villains searching for power among the infected? Is it the lab hallways filled with test tubes and technical equipment marking the finale? If that's the case, then Resident Evil Revelations 2 would fit all the criteria. Yet it doesn't really feel like a Resident Evil game. The project seems to take inspirations from the contemporary horror successes of the time, The Last of Us, Alan Wake, and Silent Hill. The game doesn't completely jump the shark or veer off of the franchise trajectory. The goal is still the same, to make a good horror game. In some ways, Revelations 2 succeeds on that goal. There are interesting enemy mechanics, good environments, and sound narrative decisions that change old characters into something new. But much like the first Revelations, the sequel feels clunky and unfinished. Certain mechanics don't mesh well with this world. Implementing stealth sections into our survival virus tale feels like the spin-off series is trying to wear the skin of another game. The focused narrative feels a lot more tailored to my interests than the complicated terrorist plot of the previous entry, but it still leaves you wanting in some areas. Resident Evil Revelations 2 is nothing amazing, but when it released, it was a necessary project. This spin-off series was trying to satiate the fans of the series who wanted more horror from Resident Evil, in a time where the main series was doing away with this idea. But when the numbered entries finally turned back to horror, there was no place for Revelation any longer. Does this game stand the test of time, or was it a necessary evil for the brief period when the fans needed it? Well, that's what I'm going to be talking about today. I'll be reviewing Resident Evil Revelations 2, talking about gameplay, mechanics, story, and every necessary evil in between. If you haven't seen my previous videos on the Resident Evil series, I would highly recommend checking those out. If you enjoy the video and want to support the channel, consider heading over to my Patreon, where I've been reviewing the Resident Evil movies. Spoilers for Resident Evil Revelations 2. Hey Dad, it's me, your favorite son, and today I'd like to talk about Resident Evil Revelations 2. After the relative success of Resident Evil Revelations for the 3DS, Capcom decided to turn the games into their own separate spin-off series. It was clear that since the series was heading in a more action-focused direction, the audiences were still craving something closer to the traditional survival horror model. Revelations 2 began development with the intention to keep providing those audiences with something that was tonally different than the numbered entries in the series. Yasuhiro Ampo was brought on to direct the second game in the spin-off series. Ampo had worked on Resident Evil 1 and 2 as a programmer, directed production on Resident Evil 5, worked on both Lost Planet and Onimusha Warlords, and would eventually go on to direct the RE2, 3, and 4 remakes. He was obviously a great choice to head the next entry in the series, but the entire team had already either worked on a Resident Evil game before, or they had worked on the first Revelations game. There were a lot of veterans stepping up to try and make this game work. Revelations 2 would separate itself in a lot of ways from the first game, but one of the largest ways that it did this was through its distribution. The first game in the series followed an episodic format, much like a TV show. It tried to give players a lot of breakpoints at which they could stop, since the game was developed for a handheld console. Revelations 2 was not released on handheld consoles though. It was mainly released on the home consoles of the time, and each episode was distributed separately. Players could purchase episodes as they released or buy the entire season all at once. The disc version was sold as well, with all episodes included and some extra content only available on that version. This was a big change for the series and untrodden ground for the franchise. At the time, episodically released games were on the rise with the success of games like The Walking Dead. Capcom seemed to be interested in taking a similar route. This was primarily due to generating interest. The week between each episode's release would increase interest in audiences instead of just the initial surge when the game dropped. but they also felt that it would allow players to discuss the episodes in between releases. One thing we want to do is try to foster communication between players who are enjoying the game. See them exchanging ideas about how they felt about this week's episode and what they think will happen next time. The first episode of Resident Evil Revelations was released on February 24th, 2015 in North America and on February 25th, 2015 in all other regions, both for the PlayStation 3 and 4, Windows, and the Microsoft Xbox 360 and Xbox One. I played the PC version of this game for this review. The PC version isn't the greatest as the controls can be a bit wonky, something I'll get into deeper in the review. The PC version also doesn't have co-op play, which was included in the console versions of the game. You can play the raid mode online, just not the main campaign, so I did not get a chance to play the co-op version of this game. Resident Evil Revelations 2 is pretty dissimilar to its predecessor. It is a third-person survival horror game where we have to manage resources and fend off attacks from enemies, but that's sort of where those comparisons begin and end. The game places us in control of 4 different characters in 2 pairs. The first that we're introduced to is the returning Claire Redfield, who hadn't been a playable character at this point since her appearance in Code Veronica in the year 2000, and Moira Burton, the newly introduced daughter of Barry Burton. The other pair is the returning Barry Burton, not seen as a main character in a game since RE1 and its remake in 1996 and 2002 respectively. His partner character is that of a small girl named Natalia. Each of these partner characters have their own respective abilities, pros, and cons. When playing either pairs, we can switch back and forth between these characters with the press of a button, much like Resident Evil 0. I was pretty interested in this concept from the start, especially because that was the part of Resident Evil 0 that I enjoyed the most. The concept in theory is pretty good, but Revelations 2 sort of introduces some unneeded complexities that it doesn't really use that well, and these are the things that bog down the system the most. Claire and Barry can both use guns, but the partner characters, Moira and Natalia, can only use specific melee weapons. Revelations 2 makes the addition of sub-weapons. These are essentially ranged throwables that can be crafted from various things we pick up in the environment. These can be Molotov cocktails, explosive bottles, smoke grenades, essentially, or decoy bottles that lure in enemies and explode after a certain period of time. These can be used by Moira, but not by Natalia. We cannot craft ammo in this entry, we can only pick it up around the environment. We can also pick up green herbs just like every other entry, but we can't craft those either. The crafting is only used for sub-weapons or specific healing items. 2 others in particular, the tourniquet and the disinfectant. The tourniquets are used when bleeding is inflicted on a character, which causes the most horrendous on-screen indicator I've ever seen, covering up the entire display in blood. And the disinfectant is used when an enemy spits at us, causing our vision to be obscured. Again, another terrible on-screen indicator that just absolutely infuriated me every time it happened. Part of the reason this debilitating gameplay disease was so annoying was that to use these items, you have to actually go into the menu. Healing is pretty simple. Hold down a button and after some time, you're patched up. But the tourniquet and the disinfectant have to be used from the menu screen, and Revelations 2 introduces a live inventory rather than one that pauses the action like the last game. Compared to the last entry, there is an overall higher emphasis on inventory management. We actually have ammo restriction and crafting, whereas Revelations wasn't as strict on these features. Both characters, even if they can use weapons or not, have inventories, and we can pass items back and forth between these characters. The partner characters, Moira and Natalia, both have abilities that allow them to gather extra items though. Moira can see and locate hidden items with her flashlight, and Natalia can point at items, making them appear in the environment. This is incredibly annoying to switch back and forth between characters to look for these extra items, to grab them. Of course, you can ignore them, but then you're just ignoring a critical part of gameplay and leaving a ton of items on the table. The game wants you to engage with the system, but the system is sort of frustrating to use. Also, having these partner characters, mostly unable to participate in combat, is just absurd. I understand it in Natalia's case, but Moira is a 20-year-old girl. She could still pick up a gun if she wanted to. I understand story justifications for this, but those were created as a way to rationalize these characters not using weapons. You easily could have just supplanted these two characters with people who could handle a weapon, or at least figure out how to. Moira can use a crowbar in combat to stun enemies and follow-up attack them once they're grounded, but it's rarely ever worth switching to her during combat to do this, because it's all just too fast-paced, meaning that you're essentially going to be leaving the other character exposed to get some free damage off on the enemy, which you could probably just do with Claire's knife anyways if you wanted to. Natalia is even more useless because she can only use bricks that she picks up around the world, but these are mostly meant to be used in her forced stealth sections, not generally in combat. Also, Moira has total control over the flashlight, meaning that even in dark areas, we are reliant on her usage of it. We have to just hope that the AI properly walks behind us so that we can see in these areas. It often does follow us well, but there's obviously a slight delay between our view and the AI, so it's just annoying. Especially because Barry has his own flashlight, so this was only implemented to make Moira seem useful. But splitting gameplay elements between characters doesn't make one more useful, it makes both seem incompetent. Both partner characters can also open specific crates throughout the game. Moira can use her crowbar to open dark-colored crates, and Natalia can use her small hands, I guess, to open these golden chests. Both types of boxes will contain some extra equipment, expanded inventory or ammo capacity, or even rare weapon parts. The whole system is just incredibly clunky when it comes to combat. There are some moments where it's used well, but it usually deals with specific enemy design rather than the overall application. Revelations 2 also brings back the weapon upgrading system from the first game. We can pick up various parts throughout the game, and these parts can then be used at upgrade tables. We equip them to weapons to add different stats, higher damage, quicker reload speed, more ammo capacity, etc. It's much the same as the previous entry. A good system for this specific series that rewards exploration and extra challenge. It's almost identical to the previous system though, so it isn't introducing anything really new. The game also implements a skill system. Between each chapter, we are rewarded BP based on how many medals or achievements we earned during the chapter. This BP can be used to purchase skills in between the chapters. There are a wild amount of skills in this game, and they range from incredibly useful to very stupid. Some of the skills force you to entirely change the way that you play the game. For example, you get a pretty large damage boost by shooting while crouched, except that crouching at the beginning of or during the middle of a gunfight is pretty unwieldy, and very rarely ever useful. There's another skill that increases the amount of damage that you do if you run before attacking with your knife. Another skill you're only going to use if you buy this skill and go out of your way. Another skill increases the damage you do when switching your weapon. These skills aren't required, but they all try to completely alter the way that you're playing the game. So much that you'll be crouching, dashing at enemies, and switching between every bullet to get the most damage that you can. It flirts with the gameplay changes that Resident Evil 6 made, searching for a deeper and more complex system underneath. It wants to be complicated and full of nuance, but it mistakes the forest for the trees. Resident Evil was always simple. The complexity came from the upgrade system, raw damage numbers, the stunned attacks you could pull off to save a bit of ammo. It was never about introducing all of these things you need to think about when in combat. These extra skills can only do one thing: pull the player out of the horror and put them into a meditative state where they're thinking more about stats, maximum damage, and combo skills. It pulls the player out of the world. I'm not saying that horror games can't ever have stats or damage increases, but the primary goal of a horror game, if trying to be effective, is to convince the player that they aren't playing a video game. Even if for a moment, the player is immersed into the experience and they forget. This is where fear is bred. But this is almost impossible if they're constantly worrying about maximizing their damage output. Thankfully, you don't need these systems to survive in this game's world. It's surprisingly forgiving for the most part, so it's essentially interact with it if you want and leave it if you don't. But this is essentially the problem with Revelations 2. There are too many systems that you have to negotiate with. You have to decide if you should even bother with them or not. These systems should be engaging and working together with the world to bring the player closer to the experience. When your player finds themselves deciding if they should even engage at all, you have a problem. The moments where the character switching is used for puzzles are few and far between, but these are where the game is the most effective. But we'll get into those moments shortly. Let's jump into the story. Resident Evil Revelations 2 takes place in between Resident Evil 5 and 6, particularly in the year of 2011. The game begins with a goofy, tongue-in-cheek advertisement for an organization called TerraSave. TerraSave was actually introduced in the original animated Resident Evil films, but it's generally an organization that tries to assist and do relief work in areas affected by bioterrorism. The ad itself is sort of a parody of charity advertisements, and it's being played at a TerraSave banquet. Claire Redfield is here as she works for the organization, and she meets up with Moira Burton. The two are clearly close, and Moira sort of idolizes Claire and the work that she does. It's actually her first day at TerraSave, working with the company and hoping to make a difference in the world. Neil Fisher, the leader of TerraSave, takes her aside to tell her about something in Washington. Tricell is involved in some sort of new virus. Neil has a list in his folder that he's crossing names off of. He quickly leaves before Claire can figure out what he's doing, and Moira is having a fight with her dad, Barry Burton, on the phone nearby. The lights quickly go out and the banquet is attacked by armed soldiers. Claire and Moira are kidnapped, injected with a sedative, and taken to a rusty iron prison. Claire awakes outfitted with some sort of bracelet, and her cell door opens, allowing her to escape and find Moira a few cells down. The cells eventually give way to a massive space with a spiral walkway leading up it, bodies hanging from chains. The facility they're in seems derelict, run down, staircases and passages completely destroyed or broken apart. As we head upstairs, the two find corridors covered in blood and bodies on tables, full of hooks. We obtain a knife from a nearby table and a memo detailing the methods for monitoring patients. The two begin their escape through the ruined passageways, but are quickly attacked by a strange beast. The two manage to get away from it, but it chases a woman through the hallways. This woman, Gina, worked for TerraSave as well, and dies from the wounds the monster caused. The two find a way out, but need a set of keys to advance. These keys are located on a nearby officer, but a camera watches as they try to grab them and causes the body to fall to the floor. We find the keys, but are set upon by a group of these creatures. After they get topside, Claire tries to give Moira a gun, but she refuses to use one. Something from her past prevents her from doing so.
You need a gun too, Moira.
No, I really don't. Sorry, I don't do firearms.
In a nearby hallway, we see a young girl running away, but we quickly lose sight of her. As the two enter into a larger prison, walls lined with cells, they hear a woman over the loudspeaker. Someone is watching them, toying with them in this rusty iron playhouse, a torture building designed with puzzles and games for them to solve.
Who the fuck is quoting poetry?
Are you afraid? You can tell me. Talk to me.
What are you talking about?
Our main goal here is to get a small cog that is trapped inside of a large, spiked steel bed. The only way to do this is to first turn on the power to the facility. We have to trudge through this area, scoping out its rust-covered halls and weaving through a variety of powered-down traps. These traps activate as soon as we turn on the power to the facility, causing our second trek through it to be far more dangerous. We'll also contend with many of the afflicted in this area. These are the fodder enemy type for Claire and Moira's scenario. They are generally very quick and aggressive. Their design, though, does not really harken back to previous Resident Evil games. They certainly don't look like the zombies of the original trilogy, or the parasite-infected monsters of the Action trilogy. They honestly resemble something closer to Silent Hill enemies than anything else. They are covered in wounds. They feel like they're being held together by ropes or staples, abused beings rather than just infected creatures. Their anger was programmed into them through countless hours of torture. In fact, a lot of this game really feels like it takes massive inspiration from Silent Hill. Maybe this was intentional or it was subconscious, but the inspiration still feels present. It's clear the team was trying to lean further into survival horror in this entry, but maybe they unconsciously took inspiration from their survival horror opposite to further that goal. The larger, more brute enemy that we face in Claire and Moira's campaign mostly are the Ironheads. Large iron triangle jaws placed atop of their torso, they certainly feel like a pyramid head comparison. The large axe hammer they whip around certainly reminds one of the Silent Hill monster's giant sword. Neither of these enemies really feel like Resident Evil, and Revelations 2 doesn't feel like a Resident Evil game in general until maybe the last chapter of the game. It's a very strange project, but I can't say that it doesn't create a unique atmosphere or a fresh environment. There's no other game in the series that feels like this one. Avoiding the traps in the facility, we can get back to the exit and place the cog inside. The cells then open and the creatures inside are unleashed upon us. It takes time for Moira to use her crowbar to pry open the door to the outside. Luckily, we can use a flamethrower that was meant to keep people out to keep these things away from us. This allows us to escape the facility, and outside we are contacted through our bracelets by this mysterious woman once again. She seems to be quoting something, and when Claire asks for some answers, she says that she is called the Overseer. She also tells Claire and Moira to go to the Vosek. We aren't sure what that is, but the two find a nearby radio tower outside and head across the bridge to try and contact someone that can get them help. They immediately find that the radio tower is dead, but Claire climbs to the top to see if she can fix the equipment. She turns on the power and Moira is able to send out a distress signal. While this is happening, Claire has a shattering revelation that they are not located in some building in the US, but on a secluded island in the middle of the ocean. This ends Claire's first chapter, and we jump over to Barry, who is heading on a boat to that very same island, with Moira's SOS message in tow. This feels very similar to the structure of Code Veronica. Claire is trapped on an island, and someone from her past is arriving to try and help her out. Though in this situation, Barry is obviously much more concerned with the fate of his daughter than Claire Redfield. When Barry gets here, he finds a small girl waiting for him. This girl is named Natalia, and Barry plans to keep her in the boat while he looks for Moira. Natalia refuses to stay behind, though, and he brings her along. The two head up the island, scaling the sides of the cliffs. Natalia doesn't remember how she got here or why she's here in the first place. They pretty quickly spot a radio tower off in the distance, the same one that Claire and Moira were heading for. This means that we have the same destination as them. We actually travel through many of the same areas that they did, and this is one of the biggest problems with Revelations 2. Barry's sections, most of the time, are essentially repeats or remixes of the areas that we just went through. Enemy placements are a bit different. In fact, the enemies we fight are different, and the path that we take through the environment is different, but that's about it. This leaves them feeling like tacked-on afterthoughts rather than feeling like another chapter in the game. They're two stories running parallel to each other, in the same place, just at different periods in time. In general, it feels a bit lazy, and having to replay levels after we played them is boring. This does get better in the second half of the game, where Barry's path diverges from Claire's a bit more, but for the first half, it's a little abysmal. And if Claire's sections feel inspired by Silent Hill, then Barry's sections feel like they're going for more of a Last of Us vibe. This game was released in 2015, 2 years after The Last of Us had hit the shelves and disk drives of gamers everywhere. Barry, a tortured father guiding a surrogate daughter through a wasteland. Overgrown buildings and forests act as the backdrop to our adventure, and an emphasis is placed on stealth sections to get around the enemies in our way. I found a lot of forum posts online discussing this very thing, claiming that Revelations 2 straight up copied The Last of Us. I wouldn't go that far, but I do think the developers were inspired by that game and wanted to take the game in that direction. Most of that, stylistically, doesn't really fit here though. It feels odd and out of place in this world of maniacal villains creating viruses to end worlds, to destroy cities, to cover up injustices. Suddenly our tone has become post-apocalyptic when we know there's a world out there still existing as usual. It feels like we're LARPing apocalypse on an island in the sea. Speaking of stealth sections, Barry's chapters have these forced in spades. We can sneak behind enemies at certain points and take them out with our knife, but this isn't possible all the time. Sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. It seems like the game has very specific times when it wants to give you the ability to stab an enemy in the back, and other points where it wants you to fight with guns. But try and stealth an enemy in one of those latter sections, and all you'll get is an angry revenant turning around to find an old man crouched behind him. Natalia can also use stealth to get around enemies. They often cannot hear her footsteps, so she can sneak through environments and spot enemies through walls as bright yellow vibrating shades. Speaking of revenants, they're an enemy introduced in Barry's section of the game. These enemies are most aptly compared to the Regenerators from Resident Evil 4. Many enemies in the series have taken inspiration from the Regenerator's design and incredible implementation that begs to be replicated. The Revenant is covered in swollen flesh, but the only way for us to kill it is to destroy the pod underneath this flesh. We can shoot at different parts of its body to reveal this pod and then attack its weak point. This is effective at creating the Regenerator implementation near the beginning of this entry. It's a tense fight every time that we meet one. It gets closer and closer with every failed uncovering. Popping these sections of swollen flesh is like flipping over concentration cards to find pairs, except it's scary. But towards the end of this game, this effect wears off. Imagine if the Regenerators were introduced at the beginning of Resident Evil 4, and we fought that enemy throughout the entire game. The Regenerator had an impact in that entry because they were sparse, sparingly used as an atomic bomb of intense pressure through combat. But here, they wear out their welcome, and that power is diluted over time. By the end of the game, they're just another fodder enemy. As Barry and Natalia, we move through this torture facility/prison, getting access to new rooms and actually trying to turn the power off, the opposite that we had to do in Claire's section. Once we get the flamethrower turned around and prevent the fires from burning our skin as we leave, the pair see the radio tower just off in the distance. They, of course, have to take a side path since the bridge that we originally took is out. This side path through the forest is where we're first introduced to the Revenant. One of the most genuinely scary moments in the game is right after this, running through the dark forest, sneaking through the grass, and seeing the Revenant's snapping forms in the shadows. When Revelations 2 manages to push its unique atmosphere, it really has something. These moments are few and far between, brief periods of the rusty halls in the opening section, the dark forest, and the foggy abandoned towns that we'll visit soon. These environments are often highly detailed, and couple these with the score and the enemy design, and you have some terrifying results. Barry and Natalia eventually find themselves in a logging camp with a massive yellow door standing in their way. We have to start the facility's power to be able to swing a bundle of trees at the door and break our way out. Of course, hordes of revenants are standing in our way, so we have to take them out first. As the two escape, Barry shoots an explosive barrel behind them, closing off the path to them and their enemies. They eventually find themselves in the same comms system that Claire and Moira were at. Barry listens to the message that Moira recorded, logged 6 months ago. After hearing Barry's daughter's name, Natalia reveals that she met Moira before, and she happens to be dead. This ends the first episode and begins episode 2, Contemplation. We see two men running through the woods trying to get away from the monsters in the trees. They are saved by Neil Fisher, the man we saw talking to Claire at the beginning of the game. They find solace in a nearby run-down building. Claire and Moira show up, initially mistaking them for monsters. They realize they're actually friends. Claire knows these two, Gabe and Pedro, two fellow members of TerraSave. They both woke up in the woods. They also have bracelets, the same ones that Moira and Claire find themselves equipped with. Pedro is inspecting another one, pried off the dead body of one of their TerraSave colleagues. All of them are once again contacted through these bracelets. The Overseer tells them they've all been infected with a virus, but only one of them has a chance of dying well. The group head outside into the surrounding port village. Gabe shows Claire that he found a helicopter nearby. He needs some fuel and a battery to get it running, so we need to find those things in the town. The village is derelict, crumbling just like the rest of the island. Collapsed walls and broken down buildings litter our passage through this place, but some of the afflicted are hiding in the wings as well. We can eventually find Pedro, who is experimenting with a new drill that he found and is taking out some walls. We have to protect him while he destroys a nearby wall that stands in between us and the fuel for the helicopter. Once we get these supplies back to the helicopter, an alarm starts up in the town, drawing any afflicted towards us. Gabe stays back to fix the chopper, and we have to head back to the bar to turn off the siren. We're locked in the building while monsters advance on our position. Pedro holds the building down with us, bringing back shades of the defense section in Resident Evil 4. Pedro is infected though, and he becomes this game's sort of chainsaw monster as he wields the drill and attacks. We aren't supposed to kill him at this point though. He's incredibly strong, so we run away, eventually getting saved by Neil, who shows up serendipitously. We escape the village, finding a nearby passage into the sewers. The group talks about this new virus. It seems to respond to fear, something that the bracelets on their arms monitor as they experience these terrifying ordeals. Neil also makes the mistake of bringing up Barry Burton in front of Moira, who she absolutely hates.
You're Barry Burton's girl, right? Your dad's in the BSAA?
Do me a favor, and don't put Barry and me in the same sentence.
We aren't really sure what caused the rift between them at this point. We're only sure that it's there. Before the group was attacked, Pedro had taken apart one of the bracelets and traced the signal to somewhere high up. When Claire and Moira and Neil emerge from the tunnels, they see a massive tower further inland on the island. This becomes their new goal, to find the Overseer there. But Neil doesn't seem keen on heading to the tower right away.
Bad idea. We should wait for dawn.
By dawn, we might all end up like Pedro. The clock's ticking, Neil.
This journey brings us into a larger town. Weaving through the streets, we are eventually attacked by a group of afflicted. Neil decides to stay back and hold them off while Claire and Moira get to escape. We head through some buildings, grab a shotgun, and see Natalia, the girl we know from Barry's chapter, running into a building. She is also equipped with a bracelet, meaning that she is not immune to the Overseer's games. In this building, we solve a puzzle utilizing the two-character system to block one of the doors from closing, leaving a small opening that we can head through. We get access to an apartment building where we eventually find Natalia cowering in the shadows. Claire tries to comfort her to no avail, and Moira, seemingly knowing what it's like to be a scared child, has just the right words for her. She gets Natalia to join them, following them through the next few rooms. A large group of afflicted lies ahead though, so she has to stay back, and we have a new mini-boss to fight. The Vulcan blubber crashes through the ceiling at some point. It's a large, fat monster equipped with a drum that it bangs on to call more afflicted to its side. It can also toss large balls of flame at us. It's a pretty difficult challenge at this point in the game, and I was pretty low on ammo, so it presented a good obstacle for the middle of this entry. Natalia helps the group unlock the door outside, and she tells them about her companion stuffed bear named Lottie.
That's a really cute bear. Is he your friend?
Lottie's a sheep. Nice man gave her to me.
What nice man.
The Terra Saver guy.
The three of them approach the nearby tower, and Gabe arrives in the helicopter, which he finally got running. Somehow, the Overseer uses his bracelet to shock the control panel, causing fear in his heart, which activates the virus and mutates him. The chopper then goes down, crashing into the side of the building from which the group just came. In the shuffle, Natalia ran away somewhere, and with this, we switch back to Barry, where Natalia is telling him about their attempt to reach the tower. This then becomes their goal as well, to also head to the tower and retrace Moira's steps. Once again, this is a fine concept in theory, but honestly this game probably would have worked better just from Barry's perspective. The game could have focused on him, trying to find Moira and retracing her steps. As we reached each area she was at, we could see flashbacks to her and Claire getting through these areas. This would have made us not have to retread so much ground throughout the entry. Barry and Natalia head through the forest, and we have some forced stealth sections, taking out revenants in the woods. They eventually arrive at the port town and we're introduced to a new type of enemy that really shakes things up in terms of gameplay. This enemy is called the Glasp, and it bends the light around it, making it appear invisible. Truly, it looks like a massive flying bug. Since it can make itself invisible though, Barry cannot see these enemies. Natalia can though, meaning that we have to use the two characters together to try and fight this thing. We can either swap to Natalia to see where the enemy is and swap back to Barry to fight it, or we can watch Natalia as she points at the enemy and try to line up her shot. We can also listen to Natalia's directions as she tells Barry where to adjust his shot.
No, more right! More right! There, shit! Keep going! No, more right!
Either way we choose to go about this, it is an intense experience. The buzzing sound of the Glasp as it creeps ever closer, the shrieks from Natalia as she warns us of its approach. The whole thing is a terrifying experience, one that is executed perfectly, and one that is wholly unique to this entry. It doesn't feel like another Resident Evil experience. It doesn't feel like it's trying to recreate something from the past, just doing something entirely new. There are moments where these things don't fit and they become more cumbersome than terrifying, but those are few and far between when compared to the moments that they do work. There's one particular moment that the monster is used in a later chapter when we are moving through a lab full of revenants in tubes. We have to shoot into the wind to try and find the Glasp, but missing a shot means firing directly into one of these tubes, freeing the revenant and making the battle more difficult. Barry and Natalia move through the town and retrace the steps that Claire and Moira took. On the way, we learn that Natalia was actually taken to a TerraSave facility in the last 6 months. The pair head through the apartment building, Barry eventually having to push the crashed helicopter out of the complex. We are then forced to fight the mutated Pedro, still alive and somehow trapped in the apartment complex. Luckily, Barry is strong enough to destroy him, which nets us a key and an escape. Barry and Natalia are finally able to reach the tower, and at its base, they find a massive shrine with a picture of Albert Wesker and a woman beside him. Her name is Alex Wesker, one of the Wesker children, someone Natalia already knows. This is the Overseer. She introduces herself, now a massive monster attached to an oxygen mask and covered in bandages. We then begin episode 3, jumping back to Claire and Moira, who find a note on the tower's front door. It's from Neil, and he tells them to head to the factory. I'm honestly not sure where to put this complaint or nitpick, but I have to put it somewhere. In this game, there is a sound effect that plays every time your character picks up a steel sort of garage door. This happens a lot in this game, but the sound effect for this action either has a sound that is very similar to a smoke alarm or literally is the sound of a smoke alarm. This same sound effect was used in the first Revelations game, and I forgot to note it in that video, but this time around it was just so loud and grating that I couldn't not notice it. It got me every time because I always thought it was an actual smoke alarm. Maybe I'm insane because I haven't seen anyone talk about this online, but it really got to me the further into the playthrough I got. Claire and Moira are being watched as they make their way through the nearby areas. They eventually come across a statue that's pinned to a door. It has Neil's TerraSave badge on it and a large hole in the abdomen. The Overseer, of course, relates this to the myth of Prometheus. Neil must have been caught attempting to steal some divine power. To get past this puzzle, we have to find 2 separate fake organs in different buildings across the property. There's a pretty genius puzzle here where we need to grab an artificial eye to get access into one of the rooms. But when we remove it, the ceiling spike trap starts to collapse in on our characters. One statue is taller than the other though, and if we heed the message on the wall, we can crouch and wait for the ceiling to crush the taller statue. One area in which Revelations 2 beats out its predecessor is in the puzzle department. The bar wasn't exactly high though, because the first game essentially only had some mobile level wire puzzles. Revelations 2 takes this a bit further though. It has general puzzles that are pretty good and puzzles that incorporate the character switching even better than Resident Evil 0 did it. There's only a few decent ones though, and I would have preferred it if they tried to make these less sparse. Once we get both organs, we obtain access into the statue-blocked building. Just as they get some progress, though, Alex Wesker activates some sort of self-destruct on the building, and it is enveloped in flames. We must escape in 5 minutes, weaving across different paths through this iron catwalk labyrinth. Doing this requires utilizing and switching back and forth between both partners, turning valves and stopping the flames from shooting out. Claire and Moira barely make it out before the entire building explodes, cast into the underground sewers. Luckily, this waterway leads right to the tower, and the Overseer seems to think that Claire and Moira died in the fire. Down in the sewers, the girls are confronted by an old man. He has lived on this island for a long time and is holed up here. He lets them go pretty quickly, though. Passing through the sewers, we eventually reach some dark room that seems filled with gravestones. This place eventually gives way to a larger room with a massive elevator to the top of the tower. In this room, Claire finds the list that Neil was checking off at the party. It has all of their names on it, and she sees Neil on a nearby monitor. He's talking to someone about candidates for experiments. The woman, seemingly Alex Wesker, shoots him with a virus, the Ouroboros virus. This was the virus the team dealt with in Resident Evil 5, created by Albert Wesker. But Alex accuses Neil of being a puppet of Morgan Lansdale, the antagonist from the first Revelations game. He was double-crossing them all. Outside, Claire and Moira attempt to get on the elevator but find Neil transforming, infected with the Ouroboros virus. He realizes he's about to change, that he made the wrong choice, that he failed, but he's also lost in the power that he's just obtained. Neil transforms into a tyrant-like creature and we have a boss battle. This fight is probably the closest this game gets to having a tyrant fight, and it's actually pretty great. Neil jumps around the arena and charges at us. We can cause him to run into the explosive canisters around the room, which causes him to be doused in flame. He attempts to put these flames out by standing underneath a broken water pipe, but this causes his heart to reveal itself, and we can shoot the pod to do higher damage. This fight can be pretty challenging, but once we do defeat him, the two women head up the elevator. Neil isn't dead though and grabs Moira, causing Claire to stab him in the eye, pushing all of them out of the box. He attacks Claire, and at this point we have two options. We can either mash the action button so that Claire picks up the weapon and shoots him, or we can switch to Moira and have her grab the weapon and shoot. This seemingly innocuous decision will actually determine the ending that we get in the game. Of course, you don't realize this when it's happening, it just sort of seems like there's two things you can do. But regardless, this will come back later, and during my playthrough, I accidentally sent myself on the bad ending. Moira has flashbacks while she's crawling towards the gun, but eventually overcomes her fear of weapons and saves Claire. Alex Wesker is watching over them once again, with Natalia as a prisoner, locked into some sort of machine. We then jump over to Barry's story once again, where the grotesque, mutated Wesker rips off her mask. Barry asks her about Moira, but gets the answer he didn't want to hear, that his daughter is dead. The afflicted begin to attack, dead set on taking out Natalia. Barry holds them off and shoots at the ceiling to get some separation between them and the enemies. After the two get out, Natalia is too injured to walk, so Barry has to carry her through the building ahead. On the way, Barry talks about his relationship with his daughter and how they fought a lot. He owns up to the fact that he was a bad father. One day, Barry forgot to lock up his guns, and Moira accidentally shot her own sister. Polly survived, but Barry didn't handle the situation properly and blamed his daughter. This caused a rift between the two, which explains the constant arguing that we see from Moira's side. Barry and Natalia head back through the sewers and eventually find the old man who confronted Claire and Moira. He's gone now, and he had Moira's cell phone. She had left a last message on her phone apologizing to her sister and father, saying goodbye for a final time. Barry and Natalia eventually end up in a sewage treatment plant. Here we have to use Natalia to run along the upper walkways, opening the doors for Barry to continue through. We have to switch back to Barry from time to time, though, to destroy barriers in Natalia's way, and to defeat enemies that are chasing her. It's a really good sequence, and another good example of the partner switching system that this game has at its disposal. I feel like the two-person puzzles are most well executed in Barry's chapters. Claire and Moira don't have too many of them, but Barry and Natalia have plenty that utilize the system well. On the other side of the treatment plant, we run into some mines. We have to restore the power to the elevator, but to do so, we need a battery block, which is all the way at the bottom of the facility. We must transport it to the top by using the various conveyor belts around the area. This is a pretty annoying puzzle, juxtaposing itself against the well-executed level design we just got done with. It's slow and plodding as it takes forever to move with the block. We do face a new enemy type here though, a sort of mini-boss called the Durlga. It's a mass of flesh, comprised of revenant corpses with a small glowing pod in its torso. We of course have to aim for the pod, but doing so can be difficult as the corpses swinging from its head get in the way of our shots. It's a decent little enemy and is fittingly grotesque for this series. Barry and Natalia eventually get the elevator in working order and head up top. The mutated Alex sneaks up on them though and casts Barry off the side of a cliff. She wants Natalia, but also wants to know why she isn't mutating or changing. Just as she's about to kill the girl, she becomes afraid of her. We then jump to episode 4, the final chapter of the game. 6 months ago, Wesker was in her lab planning to use Natalia to transfer her consciousness into. This is what these tests have all been about, finding the proper candidate for this procedure. She sent Natalia into a 6-month-long slumber to keep her in storage until the experiment was ready. Claire and Moira arrive in this lab at the top of the tower. They move through this place, finding a ton of CCTV cameras, watching everywhere they've been and monitoring them. We also find many memos upstairs, Alex reflecting on Spencer's search for immortality and how she was supposed to help him, but she went off on her own. She was looking for someone like Natalia because Natalia was incapable of feeling fear. And we also learn of Alex's obsession with Franz Kafka, specifically the story The Metamorphosis. Alex constantly quotes different pieces of Kafka's work. Obviously, the theme of transformation is very present here in not only the literal transformation that the mutated patients go through, the transformation that Alex seeks, and the transformation that Barry is forced to go through to try and make amends with his daughter. The last game, Revelations, referenced the Divine Comedy quite often, and this game places its own thematic inspirations in literature as well. It's certainly an interesting idea, and the game executes on this surprisingly well. It's done much better than the last game, which essentially used the work as a surface-level reference and character trait rather than a thematic through line to carry the story. Claire and Moira eventually confront Alex at the top of the tower through a pane of bulletproof glass. Alex has already won, though. She has the girl here, and her plans are set in motion. She then takes her own life, and the facility begins to self-destruct. We have a way to escape the facility, running down falling catwalks, pipes, and a variety of overturned debris in our way. This section is where I think the glasps are poorly used, though. There are a few of them in our way here, and they really are out of place. They work to break up the intense action of this experience. They're supposed to be an imposing enemy because we don't have Natalia in our party to spot them for us. But they just slow everything down when it's supposed to be high pace. If I haven't already said it either, they are a one-hit enemy, so if we try to run right past them, we just get instantly killed. This means we need to stop, figure out where they are, and then shoot them before continuing our intense escape of this collapsing facility. The pair's flight eventually culminates in a climb on the outside of the tower, and when Moira is trapped in the rubble, Claire is forced to make a decision. She has to leave, to save herself, and leave Moira behind. In Barry's final chapter, Claire is being rushed through a hospital. She gives him the bad news that Moira died in the tower. Barry refused to believe this, though, and now we see him in the present day, after Alex pushed him off the ledge. He's reunited with Natalia, and the two head to find Wesker. They head around to the other side of the mountain and eventually find a set of elevators along a maintenance platform. Here we can use Natalia to traverse the upper parts of the crane, and use Barry to scout the lower sections. Once again, it's another one of these great usages of the character switching system. After this, we find an elevator that takes us deep down into the earth and into possibly the worst section of the entire game. We have to navigate these tunnels that are filled with toxic gas. We can't stay in this gas for too long because our characters are holding their breaths. This means we have to run through the tunnel and get to an elevated area before too long. The problem with this is that there are too many areas that we just have to barge through, not knowing where we need to go and not having many areas that we can safely head to get a breath. It creates this scenario where we're just running our head into the wall to figure out where to go. Top this off with the fact that these areas are crawling with enemies and we have absolutely no time to get to an elevated area while also dealing with a ton of enemies in front of us. The whole area is just clunky and poorly implemented. It could have been better if there was improved level design, but that's not here. We eventually get power to the facility and clear some of the gas out of the place. This allows us to take another elevator down, which takes us to a new lab. Here, Natalia's fingerprints are the only thing that can get us inside. Alex is taunting us the whole way in, and suddenly we find ourselves in a mansion of sorts. For the finale, we get this classic setup, having to find a key to unlock a variety of doors in a mansion and gain progression. It feels like a huge throwback to classic Resident Evil entries, but honestly, when we get this in the finale chapter, the last 30 minutes of the game, it just feels sloppily implemented. And honestly, it makes me realize that we could have just had something like this for the entire game, something I would have much preferred. Downstairs, we find the testing that was being done here. They were using a resurrected version of the Ouroboros virus combined with their new T-Phobos virus to create something devastating. We have one last stand against these monsters and finally gain access to the underground tunnels here. Their walls are lined with dissected baby dolls and a tortured Lottie, the bear that Natalia grew attached to. We eventually get access to the final lab where the mutated Alex is using another virus to transform herself further. As she starts to transform, she speaks to her late brother, Albert Wesker. She never wanted the same thing as him. She wanted to transcend humanity.
I understand how you felt now, Albert. It's not enough to live. I want to transcend.
She mutates into a strange beast, walking on all fours, more spine than she is human. She attacks us around this arena, utilizing the air ducts to maneuver around. She throws different materials at us, either creating a black smoke that obscures our vision, or a toxic gas that prevents us from breathing. We have to do damage to Wesker's face and hopefully get her on her back so we can target the pod on her chest. It's a pretty difficult boss fight, though there is ample ammunition around the battlefield because when the shelves around us are crushed, we can obtain the resources inside. There are also blue boxes that have ammo and some sporadically placed on tables and in corners. When we finally defeat Alex, she will attempt to use Natalia and transfer her consciousness. If we got the bad ending, meaning that we used Claire to shoot Neil instead of Moira, then she will successfully do this. Natalia will become the conduit for Alex Wesker, and Barry will fail to shoot her, ending the game and creating the worst case scenario. If we used Moira earlier, then we get the good ending. Moira shows up and uses her gun to take out Alex before she can transfer her consciousness into Natalia. The three of them manage to escape to the edge of the island, but Wesker still pursues. Luckily, Claire arrives on a helicopter and snipes Alex, and the group is saved. Barry decides to finish this off, though, using his signature magnum to blast Alex into oblivion. We get one final section where Claire covers Barry, and she delivers the finishing blow with a rocket launcher to take out the monster. Barry walks out of the smoke with the sun on the horizon. We get our idyllic ending over the open waters in a helicopter. Barry and Moira make up on the vehicle, and he seemingly decides to take Natalia in, raising the girl as his own. We get one final cutscene with Claire being told that Chris is heading to China, setting up the story for Resident Evil 6. She's heading to the Burton household with a gift. Natalia is reading a book in her room. Seemingly, not everything from Wesker is gone in her. This is the end of Resident Evil Revelations 2, for the main game at least. The story is pretty sparse considering the game's runtime. A lot of the cutscenes are pretty short, but what it does do with its short coverage is actually pretty good. It's more of a focused story than the previous game was. I'm honestly just glad we weren't dealing with massive terrorist organizations and government agencies. Focusing the story further to just Barry and Moira's story as non-playable flashbacks would have tightened up the game a lot more in my opinion, but what we got isn't terrible. One thing that I haven't talked about too much is Moira's character. Moira is pretty foul-mouthed. This was something that the development team talked about at length in interviews. They specifically made her curse a lot because they wanted her character to be unique and to stand out.
Fucking Barry.
Who the fuck is quoting poetry?
You chopped off his fucking hand?
In my opinion, they also did this because she's a younger character and wanted her to seem more cool or hip or something. It doesn't really work most of the time, and it tends to come off more as corny than anything. It gives me some real Life is Strange flashbacks at certain points. Outside of that, I think the relationship between her and Barry is good. It's surely a compelling mystery when it's first introduced at the beginning of the game. Why are these two so angry at each other, and what could Barry have done to make his daughter hate him so much? The fact that this dynamic is compelling makes the resolution to this conflict that much more satisfying. If I had one complaint with the narrative, I would say that Claire's character is a little weak in this entry. Outside of her friendship with Neil and his eventual betrayal playing as motivation for Moira, she doesn't really do much. She's brought back not really to expand on her character, but just sort of to have a familiar face there. But there were 2 DLCs released for Revelations 2 that put us in the shoes of the partner characters. The first DLC episode to be released was called The Struggle. This episode puts us in the shoes of Moira. It takes place after she survived the collapse of the tower and covers the 6 months in between then and when Barry arrives to save her on the island. Moira is rescued by the old man whose name is Evgeny. We don't learn this until the end of the episode because he refuses to tell Moira his name and doesn't want to hear hers. He is a jaded old man that's lived on the island for far too long. It's made him realize that people go just as quickly as they came, and he doesn't want to get close to her. Evgeny teaches Moira how to use weapons and forces her to hunt with him across the island to ensure that they can both survive while she's staying here. The DLC is split up into stages, the first of which sees us hunting animals in the woods. Any animals killed during the DLC will net us rations. These rations are expended when we die, basically extra lives. If we die and don't have any rations, we have to start the DLC over from the beginning. Luckily, I didn't die one time, so the scenario was simple enough that I didn't really have to worry about this mechanic. We have to protect their living space one day when Moira accidentally leads a ton of afflicted to their home. Evgeny is understandably very upset about this, but the episode ends as the two find a listing of people that were experimented on in the nearby mines. One of the names listed is that of Evgeny's daughter, Irina. The two head into the mines to try and find her, and eventually they find a note that she left behind before she died. This brings a massive emotional scene where Moira and Evgeny's dynamic sort of comes to a head. The old man decides to lock himself away and die now that he has nothing to live for. Moira is inspired to find her father and head across the island to see Barry in his final confrontation with Wesker, connecting the DLC with the finale of the base game. The second DLC is titled Little Miss and sees us playing Natalia as she is taunted by a dark vision of herself, seemingly some remnant of Alex's consciousness, trying to manipulate her into allowing Alex to transfer her consciousness into her body and give up her struggle. We have to sneak through various areas, avoiding revenants and attempting to find postcards that were left by Lottie, the bear that Natalia kept with her as a friend. We can swap to Dark Natalia and use her as a spotter throughout the DLC. She can't be seen by the enemies, so we can freely walk around environments and spot enemies before we send Natalia up. We do this 3 times before Natalia realizes what Alex is up to. Her plan fails, and Natalia wakes up finding herself on the shore, about to meet Barry, linking this DLC up with the beginning of Barry's chapters of the base game. These DLCs are what I would call fine, but mostly unnecessary. They're incredibly short and really not worth the trouble unless you're super concerned about these holes in the story. If that is the case, then I've just told you about them anyways, so I guess that doesn't matter. The Natalia DLC is very cumbersome because the stealth system in the base game wasn't very good when it was optional, so now that it's mandatory, it's really annoying to interact with. It's not only frustrating because it often doesn't work properly, but it's slow because enemies take so long to pass the areas that you need them to. There's a lot of waiting, and none of it is particularly intense or impactful. Before I give my final thoughts on Revelations 2, I need to talk about one more extra mode. Revelations introduced raid mode to the series, and Revelations 2 has its own raid mode, completely overhauled and upgraded to provide longevity to the game. Before I get into the details, I have to say that I loved the raid mode in the first Revelations. It was a really interesting evolution of the Mercenaries formula, and in some ways surpassed certain iterations of the minigame. Revelations 2 is even better, taking everything that the previous system did and fine-tuning it. In this raid mode, we can move through sets of levels, each with a variety of enemies for us to face. We fight off these enemies in waves until one of them drops a key, and that allows us to move on to the next area. We do this until the level is finished. Each level gives us a certain amount of experience and BP. Experience increases our level, and each level gives us more skill points that we can use to buy different skills and change our character. Increasing our level also unlocks new skills for us to equip, both active skills and passive skills. Active skills, for example, are something like Wesker's electric bottle that he can throw at a crowd and cause them to all be shocked. Passive skills can be anything from increasing max health to increasing the damage we do when crouched. A lot of these skills are pulled straight from the main game, but there's a ton of new ones that are introduced specifically for raid mode since it's a lot more arcadey. The BP that we earn can be used for a ton of different things. Just like the last game, we can buy weapons or parts for those weapons from the store. We can also get weapon and part records from the levels that we complete. These weapons and parts have to be identified, much like any standard ARPG. This costs currency, but extra weapons or parts can be sold. A new system that this raid mode introduces is the ability to combine duplicate parts to increase their level. This adds a huge ability to craft different builds and get better gear. This whole thing is basically like a Resident Evil looter shooter, and it's pretty great. It's incredibly addicting, and it just sucks away your time. There's also a ton of levels here, so many different ones that we can take on and try to complete. Just like last time, we get medals for completing the level in certain ways. If we complete the area at or below the recommended level, if we defeat all enemies, and if we don't use any healing items, then we get medals for each. If we do all three of these in one go, then we get an extra medal for the completionist effort. These medals actually serve more of a purpose than just giving us extra experience and BP though. Collecting these medals allows us to unlock further sets of levels. We can complete each set on a harder variety for a bigger challenge and for more rewards. I just can't even express how damn fun this mode is. I just kept playing it over and over again. I imagine that when the game came out, this would have just been an insane value. The original raid mode had the problem of being a bit too grindy for my tastes. The core system was really well executed, but the balance was just a bit off and made it a little repetitive. Raid Mode 2 is not that grindy, at least not in the beginning. There's a lot more leeway here, and it honestly just makes the progression so much more smooth. There's a decent variety of characters, though it's nothing like previous games. The map variety is huge, though. There's actually a ton of maps from Resident Evil 6 in here, which I found pretty refreshing. And that should be surprising, especially with how much of a Resident Evil 6 hater I was. Still, these maps work pretty well in this arcadey mode. The whole thing is fantastic. I could see a ton of people putting a lot of time into this mode when the game was released. Even today, it's a fun little action mode that gives the player a ton of room to play around with builds, characters, and weapons. One of my favorite mercenaries/raid mode games in the entire franchise. Resident Evil Revelations 2 is a very strange game. It doesn't really fit into the larger Resident Evil franchise anywhere. It doesn't even really feel like it fits in this sub-series. Sure, it was trying to be more of a survival horror game, and I do think it succeeds in that effort. It's more terrifying than Revelations 1, and it manages to create a better atmosphere with less focus on action than the first game did. But it also feels kind of like Silent Hill, and The Last of Us, and Alan Wake. It's just this weird mishmash of horror trends that were popular at the time, and it doesn't really feel like a Resident Evil game at the end of the day. But what if we take it out of the series and just try to analyze it on its own? By itself, the game is decent. There are really bright moments in this game. When the character switching system was used well, the game seemed to shine. For a moment, the clouds opened and I could see a sliver of what the team was originally going for. There was something there. The initial interest in this system was correct. It was a good path to travel down, but it's not utilized enough in this entry to really feel like they take the idea all the way. The enemies at certain points also feel like they have something going for them. For the most part, they're well designed. They look visually appealing, especially for the environment. It all feels like it clicks together, and the game feels like one of the grimiest entries in the series. It feels like rust-peeled walls, waterlogged floors, rotting floorboards, and sinking rooftops. That atmosphere and tone is evoked incredibly well in the game. The enemies reflect this tone, terrifying creatures, products of torture and manipulation, true experiments in their own right, people pushed to the edge of humanity until they are nothing more than a shade infected with viruses. Speaking of environments, these generally look great as well. In the context of a spin-off title for a larger franchise, they actually shocked me with the amount of detail, especially in areas that weren't traversable, only meant to be viewed from afar. The story is a bit hit or miss. Some parts of it work. The relationship between Barry Burton and his daughter, for example. I like the idea of turning the concept of Burton on its head. Barry was a family man the first time that we saw him. He did everything in the first game for his family. That was essentially the only thing we really knew about him. But now we see him again, and he's doing the same thing, but his daughter is old enough to form her own opinions. It's a strong subversion of the expectations you carry around Burton's character. But a lot of the other stuff in the campaign is just weak. I never really felt invested in Wesker as a villain. The problem here is just that she isn't even really introduced until the last chapter of the game. This is supposed to be the big reveal, but we don't have a ton of experience with this character, other than overseer calls through the bracelets. If you were really paying attention, then you would remember her being referenced in Resident Evil 5, but that's it. And a lot of the story really just feels like filler. This game could have been pared down considerably, or at least, like I said, focus the story on Barry and his efforts to find his daughter. This would have allowed the team to iron down some of the systems and make the game feel more focused overall. When the game is weak, though, it's really weak. Some of the gameplay sections were incredibly infuriating. The introduction sequence in the prison was so cumbersome. Trying to leave this place just felt like it wasn't supposed to work. The game wants you to do something, but until you get that cube properly oriented into the hole, you're going to be frustrated. The same thing goes for the ending sequence in the gas tunnels. These large set pieces just feel like the developers had an idea for a gameplay mechanic or an environment design, but they didn't really think it through. Some of the slower parts of the game, the mines and a few of the forest sections, just feel far too long. The forced stealth sections make the game appear incompetent, like the systems aren't fully fleshed out. Revelations 2 had nothing that I really enjoyed from the first game, but it also had so much that the first game didn't have that I absolutely loved. I can't say that I hated the game or that I didn't enjoy my time with it, but I also don't think it's a game that I would ever go back and play again. Resident Evil Revelations 2 did well in sales, shipping 2.6 million copies by 2020 and outselling the previous game in the series. It got mixed reviews though, and most of the reviewers criticized technical aspects of the design. It currently has a 75 out of 100 on the PS4 version of the game. I'm not sure that the Revelations series will ever come back, especially considering how much more profitable everything else has been for Capcom. It also doesn't bode well for the series that the main numbered franchise went back to a survival horror style. Once Resident Evil 7 was released, there really was no place or need for the Revelations series anymore. But for the time it was released, when the numbered titles were focused on the action genre, it was important. Before I can say that I've reviewed every Resident Evil game, I need to cover one more spin-off series, but I'll talk about that next time. Bye, Dad. Thanks again for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe, as it really helps me out. Apparently, there's also some sort of new YouTube feature called the hype button, so I guess if you could do that too. If you want to support the channel further, consider subscribing to the Patreon as well. I've recently been covering the Resident Evil movies over there, and I'm almost done. So if you haven't seen those reviews, then there's a lot of backlog to be watched. You also get to add your name to this list of awesome people right here. Obviously, you probably know which Resident Evil games I'm going to be talking about next, and I'll be getting to those soon. Currently, I'm drilling down and trying to finish the absolute behemoth video that is going to be Death Stranding 2. For real this time, I'm serious. Keep an eye out, and I'll see you soon. Bye now.